In the beginning, we are not ourselves. We are what they need us to be. We learn to smile when praised, to shrink when scolded, to bend toward expectations like trees reaching toward a sun that was never their own. This adaptation is necessary for survival. The psyche must adjust to its environment. But over time, what begins as survival becomes a habit of erasure. We lose our original shape. We forget that beneath the roles, beneath the masks, beneath the pleasing and the striving, there is something untouched, the self. The self is not the ego, nor is it the persona we craft to navigate the world. The ego identifies with achievements, status, possessions, or emotional narratives. The persona is the social mask, adaptable, fluid, performative, but the self is different. It is central, whole, and not confined by the boundaries of personality or the categories of identity. It is not something we construct. It is something we uncover. It exists beyond praise and blame, beyond failure or success. It is, simply, the root from which all true life grows. To recognize the self as a sacred center is to begin a journey of return. It is a withdrawal of attention from the fragmented mirrors of others' expectations. When you finally choose yourself, you are not declaring war on the world, you are laying down the arms you've used against yourself. You are choosing to inhabit the space of your own soul fully, without apology. This return often begins in crisis. The outer world may still be intact, the job is steady, the relationships are functional, but inside, something stirs. A restlessness, a sense of falseness, a whisper saying, "This is not who you are." That whisper is the self, rising from beneath the rubble of years of conditioning. It cannot be silenced forever. It will press into dreams, surface in emotional breakdowns, or emerge through a quiet, persistent longing for something more real. The self does not clamor, it waits. In a world that rewards compliance and speed, returning to the self feels like rebellion. Suddenly, the familiar becomes alien. The conversations that once felt comforting now seem hollow. The ambitions that used to drive you become burdensome. You begin to see how much of your life has been constructed around what others valued, not what you value. This clarity can be disorienting, even painful, but the pain is not punishment. It is the birth pangs of truth. There is a sacred stillness that comes when one stops running from themselves. You sit with your own breath. You ask, "What do I want?" Not what you should want, not what is safest or most impressive, but what calls to you from the depths of your being. The answers may not come quickly. They rarely do. But even the act of asking begins to reorient your inner compass. This process demands courage. Choosing yourself often means disappointing others. It may require stepping out of the roles that once earned you love. It may mean being called selfish, misunderstood, even abandoned. But there is a deeper abandonment already in place, the abandonment of your own soul, and that wound is more dangerous than any rejection the world can offer. When you reclaim the self, you begin to heal not only your present, but the echoes of every time you betrayed yourself to be accepted. The sacred center is not flashy. It does not scream for validation. It feels like silence, like coming home to a place that has always existed, just beyond the noise. It is an internal alignment where your values, desires, and actions begin to harmonize. You feel less fragmented, less at war with yourself, more grounded, more alive. This inner shift transforms everything else. Relationships begin to feel different because you are no longer performing. You speak with more clarity, more compassion, but also more boundaries. You become less interested in being liked and more devoted to being true. The work you do starts to hold meaning, not because of external reward, but because it resonates with your deeper calling. The way you spend your time, the way you care for your body, the rituals you return to all begin to orbit this sacred center. To live from the self is not to become someone new, but to become deeply familiar with who you've always been beneath the roles. It is not self-centeredness, as the world often accuses, but self-rootedness, a way of being that acknowledges your life is not a performance for others, but a conversation with the eternal, conducted through the language of your own soul. There comes a point in every genuine transformation where the facade begins to crack. This moment is rarely glamorous. It does not arrive with celebration, but with quiet dread, as if the foundations of everything you have built are beginning to tremble. The persona, the mask worn to navigate society, begins to feel like a cage. You sense it first in small discomforts, laughter that feels forced, conversations that seem empty, achievements that leave you hollow. Then one day, perhaps in solitude or in the wake of disillusionment, you look at yourself in the mirror and ask, who am I, really, without all of this? The persona is a necessary construction. It is the social mask we craft to fit into the world. We develop it as children to survive, to be accepted, praised, and loved. Over time it hardens. We become the responsible one, the smart one, the strong one, the agreeable one, not because we are only these things, but because they ensure belonging. The tragedy lies not in the creation of the persona, but in our forgetting that it is a performance. We begin to believe the act. We become trapped in a role that no longer fits, often long after the original audience has disappeared. The destruction of the persona is not an intellectual exercise. It is existential. It unravels everything you thought was you. The success you chased may have never been your definition. The relationships you maintained may have never nourished you. The values you upheld may have belonged to your culture, your parents, your peers, anyone but your own soul. And once this awareness takes root, there is no going back. The persona cannot be rebuilt once the illusion is seen. It can only be mourned. This mourning is crucial. The mask may have been false, but it served you once. It protected you. It helped you belong. There is no wisdom in mocking the roles you once played. They were a part of your path, however misaligned they became. But now, in the light of deeper self, knowing they are too small, they cannot contain the full range of your being. When the persona breaks, what you are left with at first is not clarity, but confusion. You feel exposed, raw, directionless. People around you may resist this change. They will call you different, distant, dramatic. But you are not changing into something alien. You are returning to something authentic. It is in this space of uncertainty that the true work begins. Without the persona to mediate your existence, you must now face yourself directly. The discomfort you once numbed with performance now demands attention. Emotions buried under years of conformity rise to the surface. Shame, fear, grief all come forward, not to torment you, but to be integrated. These are not enemies. They are parts of you that the persona denied. In allowing them to speak, you begin to reclaim your full humanity. Relationships are often the first to be affected. The scripts you once followed, the peacemaker, the savior, the martyr, no longer feel bearable. You begin to say no. You begin to speak truths that were once kept silent. Some people will resist this. They were in relationship with your mask, not your soul. Others may leave, let them. The connections that survive this shedding are forged in truth, not performance. They may be fewer, but they will be deeper, freer, more alive. The destruction of the persona also changes your orientation toward achievement. The ego's hunger for validation loses its grip. You begin to ask not what will they think, but what feels true. The work you once did to be seen now seeks meaning. Success is no longer measured in external metrics, but in internal alignment. You begin to create, to move, to speak from a place that is not reactive, but responsive, not shaped by fear, but led by integrity. This process is not linear. The persona does not dissolve in a single moment. It returns in moments of fear, seducing you with promises of ease and familiarity. But each time you choose presence over performance, you weaken its hold. You learn to live without the mask, to trust your face, your voice, your essence. And slowly, something new begins to emerge, not a better version of the persona, but the undivided self beneath it. This emergence is not loud. It does not demand attention. It is quiet, grounded, often invisible to those still caught in performance. But within you, it is unmistakable. There is a growing peace, a coherence between your inner world and outer expression. You feel less fragmented, less exhausted. Life becomes less about managing impressions and more about inhabiting truth. You begin to see how much energy was spent upholding an image and how liberating it is to let it collapse. The freedom is not the freedom to be liked, but the freedom to be real. Within every person exists a landscape largely hidden from view, a terrain shaped not by light, but by darkness. It is composed of memories we refuse to touch, traits we disown, instincts we bury, and truths we fear. This is the shadow. It is not evil, though we often treat it as such. It is not to be conquered or denied, but met. For until we face the shadow, we remain strangers to ourselves, haunted by the very parts we pretend do not exist. The shadow is born in the earliest moments of life, when we begin to realize that certain behaviors, emotions, or desires bring punishment or rejection. A child who expresses anger and is reprimanded learns to hide their rage. A child who cries and is called weak begins to silence their sadness. A child who dreams too boldly and is shamed for it may shrink their aspirations. These disowned parts do not vanish. They retreat into the unconscious, where they fester, grow distorted, and seek expression in ways we cannot always control. What we reject, we project. The shadow, when unintegrated, does not lie dormant. It spills into our lives through reaction, judgment, and sabotage. We see in others what we cannot accept in ourselves. We vilify the traits that mirror our own repressed qualities. We lash out or withdraw without understanding why. Our behaviors become unpredictable, and our lives feel governed by forces beyond our control. These forces are not external. They are the exiled aspects of our own psyche, demanding to be acknowledged. The process of integration begins not with condemnation, but with curiosity. To ask not, how do I destroy this part of me, but what does this part want me to see? The shadow carries not only darkness, but power. Beneath the rage may be a voice that demands justice. Beneath the envy may be a call toward one's unrealized potential. Beneath the fear may lie a hunger for freedom. Each trait, no matter how feared or despised, holds a message from the deeper self. To engage the shadow is to enter a sacred confrontation. It requires humility to admit that you are not only the virtues you display, you are also the manipulative, the jealous, the resentful, the prideful. These aspects do not define you, but they are a part of you. The goal is not to indulge them, nor to be consumed by them, but to hold them within conscious awareness, to say, I see you. I will not let you rule me, but I will not banish you either. This integration is rarely graceful. It is a descent, a psychological underworld journey. You may be forced to revisit painful memories. You may come face faced with truths about yourself that contradict your carefully crafted self-image. You may lose people who only knew the mask, but what is gained is authenticity. When the shadow is made conscious, it no longer acts as saboteur. It becomes an ally, a source of creativity, resilience, and wholeness. Relationships take on new depth when shadow work is embraced. No longer do you demand perfection from others. You understand that everyone carries unseen burdens. You become less reactive, more compassionate. You stop projecting your wounds onto others and begin owning your role in the patterns that repeat. Intimacy deepens because vulnerability replaces performance. You are not trying to be good. You are trying to be whole. This path also liberates untapped potential. Many gifts lie dormant in the shadow because they were once associated with shame. A woman who was told to be quiet may find her voice in the shadow. A man discouraged from tenderness may rediscover his capacity to nurture. A child mocked for dreaming may find their forgotten imagination. To integrate the shadow is not only to heal, but to reclaim. It is an act of remembrance, of who you were before you learned to hide. The world itself becomes more complex, more real. Black and white thinking dissolves. You recognize that light and dark, good and bad, are interwoven in all people, including yourself. Moral superiority fades. What replaces it is a mature awareness that to be human is to be both flawed and divine. You stop seeking purity and begin seeking presence. In that presence, the shadow no longer lurks in the corners of your mind. It sits beside you, no longer feared, no longer dominant, but honored as part of the whole. There is a silent war within every person, the war between becoming and belonging. From our earliest moments, we are shaped by the need to fit in, to find safety through similarity. The child learns quickly which behaviors bring approval and which bring punishment. Conformity is the unspoken contract we sign with family, school, culture, and society. We trade uniqueness for acceptance, intuition for instruction, and the freedom to be for the comfort of being recognized by others. This trade is not inherently wrong. It is a developed mental necessity, but when it becomes a permanent way of being, we lose ourselves inside a costume that was never meant to last. Individuation is the sacred process of reclaiming the self from the many layers of conformity that have accumulated over a lifetime. It is not an act of rebellion against the world, but a movement toward internal truth. It does not ask you to become someone else. It asks you to finally become yourself. This is not the surface self, not the roles you play or the labels you wear, but the core essence that existed before you were told who you had to be. This essence is not taught, it is remembered. Conformity often masquerades as peace, but it is a peace built on suppression. We silence our questions to maintain harmony. We stay in careers that deaden the soul because they earn applause. We remain in relationships that no longer nourish us because they look right from the outside. Slowly, the gap widens between who we are and who we appear to be. We feel tired without knowing why. We feel disconnected in rooms full of people. We follow routines, chase goals, uphold values. But underneath it all, we feel like actors performing a script we never wrote. The call to individuate can begin subtly, like a whisper in the dark. It may come in dreams that disturb your sleep, in conversations that stir discomfort, in a growing sense that the life you are living does not belong to you. This discomfort is not a problem to be fixed. It is a signal that the soul is awakening. The path of individuation begins the moment you choose to listen to this call rather than silence it. From that moment on, your life begins to reorganize around authenticity instead of adaptation. Individuation requires sacrifice, not of the self, but of the false self. This shedding can feel like death. You may grieve identities that once defined you. You may feel lost without the roles you used to perform. The structure of your life may start to crumble, not because you are failing, but because you are outgrowing what no longer fits. This disintegration is a necessary step. Before a new shape can emerge, the old one must be dismantled. This process cannot be hurried or imposed. It is deeply personal and often invisible to the outside world. No one can individuate for you, and no external validation can guide you through it. The compass must turn inward. You begin to ask different questions. What do I truly value? What do I believe outside of what I've been told? What parts of myself have I exiled in order to belong? These are not easy questions, and they do not always yield immediate answers. But the act of asking begins to shift your orientation from the external to the internal, from imitation to integration. In choosing individuation over conformity, you begin to notice the quiet integrity that arises from alignment. You no longer need to impress because you are impressed by the truth you carry. You no longer chase status because you are rooted in meaning. You stop comparing because there is no one else to compare yourself to when you are finally living your own life. The external world may not reward you for this shift. In fact, you may face criticism, distance, even loneliness. But these losses are the cost of entry into a deeper, more authentic way of being. Relationships, too, begin to transform. Some will dissolve because they were based on your conformity rather than your truth. Others will deepen, becoming richer and more intimate as you bring your full self into them. You no longer seek approval, you seek resonance. You begin to attract people who honor your wholeness rather than your performance. These connections are rare, but they are real. They are not built on illusion, but on mutual presence. Individuation does not lead to perfection. It leads to wholeness. You remain complex, contradictory, evolving. But you are no longer fragmented. You no longer split yourself into acceptable and unacceptable parts. You live from a center that is yours, not borrowed. You begin to trust your inner voice more than the noise around you. And as you do, your life begins to feel less like a performance and more like a homecoming. To live divided is to live in constant tension. It is a silent ache, a gnawing sense that you are never fully here, never fully yourself. You may appear calm, accomplished, even admired, but beneath the surface there is a fracture, a split between the life you present and the life you long for. The world teaches us to divide ourselves. Be good, not wild. Be polite, not honest. Be successful, not soulful. And so we learn to exile parts of ourselves to win love, to gain security, to avoid punishment. This fragmentation is not always visible, but it is always felt. We become distant from our instincts, our emotions, our inner truth. We call it maturity, but it is more often quiet despair. Wholeness is not the perfection of character, but the integration of opposites. It is not about becoming only light, only positive, only virtuous. That kind of aspiration is another mask, another performance. Wholeness includes contradiction. It includes both the sinner and the saint, both the wounded child and the wise adult, both the longing for connection and the need for solitude. To be whole is to say yes to every part of you, not in indulgence, but in presence. It is the radical act of no longer abandoning yourself. The liberation of wholeness begins the moment you stop trying to become someone and start remembering who you already are. Beneath the layers of conformity, performance, and repression lies a self that is undivided, unashamed, unafraid. This self is not concerned with roles or image. It does not fit into simple categories. It is wild, intuitive, tender, and fierce. It weeps without shame. It roars without apology. It dreams without asking permission. It does not care whether it is acceptable. It only cares that it is true. To return to this self is to liberate your vitality. Much of what we call fatigue is not physical but psychological. It is the exhaustion of maintaining a false self. It is the burden of constantly monitoring how you are seen, measuring your words, censoring your impulses. When you begin to live from wholeness, this energy returns. You no longer waste yourself in pretending. You become available to the present moment. You feel more alive because you are no longer divided against yourself. This wholeness brings with it a new kind of clarity. Decisions no longer arise from fear or obligation, but from alignment. You are not asking what will impress others, but what nourishes you. You are not concerned with appearances, but with essence. This clarity does not make life easier in the conventional sense. In fact, it may make you more sensitive to the world's falseness. But you are no longer willing to sacrifice your soul for comfort. You have tasted the freedom of being whole, and no amount of approval can replace that. The outer world may resist this change. Systems are built to reward fragmentation. Employees who suppress their creativity to meet deadlines, lovers who suppress their needs to maintain peace, citizens who suppress their truth to avoid conflict. To be whole in such a world is to stand in quiet defiance. You do not have to speak louder or move faster. You simply have to remain rooted in your own center, unmoved by the winds of expectation. This stillness becomes its own revolution. Relationships evolve in the light of wholeness. When you no longer need to hide parts of yourself, you invite others to do the same. You are not seeking to be completed by someone else, because you no longer see yourself as broken. Love becomes less about possession and more about presence. You do not cling out of fear, but connect out of freedom. You do not manipulate to be seen, but reveal yourself in truth. The intimacy that arises from this is not always easy, but it is real. It is built not on illusions, but on two people who are willing to be seen in their entirety. Creativity flourishes in wholeness. When you stop judging parts of yourself as unworthy, you reclaim the full spectrum of your imagination. Ideas come not from strategy, but from soul. Expression becomes an offering, not a performance. You create not to gain approval, but to make contact with something deeper. The act of creation becomes a sacred dialogue between the conscious and the unconscious, the known and the mysterious, the personal and the eternal. Wholeness is not a destination, but a practice. It is the daily choice to remain in relationship with all that you are, to welcome what arises without flinching, to listen without immediately fixing, to speak from truth even when it trembles, to feel fully and without judgment. This practice does not lead to a life without pain, but it does lead to a life without pretense. You suffer, but you do not suffer alone. You carry your fear, but you do not carry it in silence. You walk through the world, not as a fragment or a facade, but as a complete and sacred being, imperfect and whole all at once. To finally choose yourself above all else is not an act of selfishness, but an act of sacred responsibility. It is the quiet, often painful dismantling of the lies you've lived and the illusions you've inherited. It is the reclamation of your soul from the hands of expectation, performance, and fear. You unmask the persona and see what lies beneath. You confront the shadow not as an enemy, but as a forgotten companion. You walk the lonely path of individuation, letting go of the comfort of the crowd for the clarity of your own voice. And as you gather the lost, silenced, and shamed parts of yourself, you return, not to the version of you the world wanted, but to the wholeness that was always waiting. This journey is not clean. It breaks before it builds. It demands more than it rewards, at least at first. But in time, a different kind of peace emerges. Not the peace of fitting in, but the peace of standing rooted in who you truly are. You no longer chase validation because you've touched something more enduring than approval. You no longer abandon yourself to be loved because you have learned to love what is real, not what is ideal. The world may not celebrate this transformation. In fact, it often resists it, but the soul recognizes its own becoming, and from this place, this raw, grounded, luminous center, you begin to live not from reaction, but from truth. Not from fragmentation, but from wholeness. You are no longer a stranger to yourself. You have returned, and in choosing yourself, you make space for others to do the same. This is how a life is not just changed, but consecrated.